Oh boy, where do we even begin? I have absolutely no words for this game, and it's not like I expected to anyway. But here we are, and I'm reviewing the stats, the box score, the play-by-play for this game. And let me tell you something. Everything except the scoreboard is near carbon copy. Near carbon copy to last year's matchup. This was a bad game. An absolutely bad game. Ohio State moves to 6-0, 3-0 on the year. Michigan State, 2-4, 0 of 3 in Big Ten play on the year. And if you're wondering why the air horn was used, it's because this game, this series, is a meme. It is nothing more than a meme, and it hasn't been anything more than a meme since 2019. I don't even know what to say. I mean, the fact that Michigan State's first score of the game was a pick six, like one of the worst secondaries in the nation, picked off one of the best QBs in the nation and returned it for 6, is a meme. I know it was on a busted play by an Ohio State wide receiver who was a young guy. It's still funny, nonetheless. Like, the Michigan State Spartan secondary, the anyone can fly zone, picked off CJ Stroud. This game, oh boy, I will start off first and foremost by saying that Michigan State played a better brand of football today than when they played against Minnesota. That's probably the one, maybe the only encouraging thing about this if you're a Spartan fan. Your defense did make some plays, like the pick six, like having a sack. Your offense actually scored in the first half. It was a 21-13 game at some point. It was a 7-7 game at some point. It's just, to me, it's fascinating. From a Michigan fan standpoint, from a college football standpoint, this game was intriguing. It was fascinating. Mostly because of you look at the team stats, the total yards. Ohio State 614, Michigan State 202. In the 2021 matchup, total yards, Ohio State 655, Michigan State 224. Turnovers, MSU and OSU both had one turnover in both this matchup and last year's matchup. Michigan State had 12 total first downs in the 2022 and 2021 game. Ohio State had 36 last year, 29 this year. In both games, Ohio State had 37 minutes of TOP. The statistics of this game, the raw statistics, are insanely similar. The biggest difference, perhaps, is the fact that Ohio State didn't pass for 450 yards. They just passed for 377. Ohio State also averaged more yards per pass and more yards per rush than they did last year. Ohio State had 4 penalties for 49 yards in this game. Michigan State had 6 for 45. Last season, Ohio State had 1 penalty for 5 yards. Michigan State had 3 for 30. So Ohio State, once again this year, being better in literally every statistical category possible. It was insane. Kyle McCord also got playing time in this game, much like last year's game. So this game wasn't competitive. That's a duh. And I honestly don't know what all I can talk about for 20 to 25 minutes, but I'm probably going to find things to talk about anyway. So that's what this game was. It's exactly what this game was. And this game, I watched it on mute. I watched it on mute for most of the film that I saw and most of the live TV that I saw on this. It was a bloodbath, like last year's matchup. And for Ohio State, regardless, unless you struggled in this game or lost, in my opinion, you're still the number 1 team in the nation. Your offensive efficiency is ridiculous. I mean, CJ Stroud passed for 6 touchdowns, just like he did last year, 21 of 26, 361 yards. It was insanity. And again, he threw a pick. He didn't complete as many passes, but he had a higher average yard per pass than last season, which is crazy. That's like video game statistics 2.0. That was insane. Travion Henderson had 19 carries for 118 yards and 1 touchdown. Michigan State had a total of 7 rushing yards on 20 rushing attempts. This team actually had some efficiency through the air because Peyton Thorne was able to throw a touchdown in the first half to Jaden Reed, who made an amazing catch in coverage, and he had 67 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. This game, let's just jump right into the analysis. The Buckeyes and Spartans are separated by a massive chasm, and I guess where I'll go in this video that's possibly different from other videos is talking more about recruiting. Because I think this is something that Mel Tucker has realized for his whole tenure here. This is something Michigan State fans and other fans too, who were very high on Michigan State, and rightfully so, are now beginning to realize. These two teams shouldn't even be on the same planet. They shouldn't legally be allowed to step on the same field because murder will occur. It did this year. It did last year. It did in 2020. It was somewhat competitive in 2019, but at the end of the day, it still occurred then. Michigan State and Ohio State have not played a competitive game since 2018. They have not played a 1-score game since 2016. Michigan State hasn't won at home against the Buckeyes since before I was born in 1998. Michigan State's last victory against Ohio State came against them in Columbus in 2015. Before then, it was against them in the Big Ten Championship game in 2013. Before then, it was against them in 2011 in Columbus. Mark D'Antonio having a pretty good record against Ohio State in Columbus and on the neutral field. Ohio State's offense is as elite as it gets, and that's what stinks when facing them when you have a broken defense like Michigan State does. Like, it stinks. And you have to, if your defense isn't elite, and even if your defense is elite, you're going to have to engage in some kind of scoring fest with Ohio State at some point. Jackson Smith-Njigba, possibly the best wide receiver in the nation, wasn't even on the field. Emeka Egbuka, who's a redshirt freshman, I'm pretty sure, or maybe a sophomore. I don't know if he's a sophomore. He didn't get redshirted last year, pardon me. He played, I think, mostly every game on special teams. He averaged 30 yards per reception. Every time Emeka caught the ball, Ohio State was 30 yards, or to put it in perspective, 90 feet down the field. 90 feet. Every time Julian Fleming caught the ball, 20 yards, or 60 feet down the field, basically, if you round it to the nearest, 10th number. Marvin Harrison Jr., 18.7 yards per reception. Marvin Harrison Jr., again, nearly 60 feet down the field every time he caught the football. Ohio State had a long of 69 for Emeka, 51 for Julian, and 32 for Marvin in yards. That was their longest reception. That's what I was trying to say. It was crazy. This game was crazy. And Ohio State's offense is just as good as it gets. It really is. Ohio State also ran very effectively against Michigan State. Last year it was kind of hit and miss with the run game, and the run game really only worked against Michigan State last year because the passing game was in full bloom. And if one part of your offense is working perfectly, the other parts are going to work well. Absolutely, because if one part of your offense is working perfectly, any competent defensive coordinator is going to do anything he can to shut down that part, like shut down the passing game if your passing game's perfect. which leads for opportunities in the run or for draws, for example. Ohio State didn't even have to do that. They averaged 5.2 yards per carry. Travion Henderson had a long rush of 26. He had 118 rushing yards for 6.2 yards per carry. Dallin Hayden, he had 14 carries for 70 rushing yards, 5 yards per carry. Wide receiver Xavier Johnson had 3 carries for 23 yards and 7.7 yards per carry. I mean, offensively, passing, rushing, blocking, receiving, it was just up and down the field. Up and down the field. Up and down the field. And for Michigan State, this team is just broken. It's a chaotic mess. Michigan State's defense, I mean, this might even be somewhat of a not low blow, but honestly, the defense might have been the most impressive part. Honestly, might have been the most impressive part. Because Michigan State, they did score once they scored once offensively. 6 points. The extra point was missed, which again is another reason why this game and matchup was completely memed from the beginning. Peyton Thorne went 11 of 18 for 113 yards, 6.3 yards per pass for a touchdown and a pick. He had a much better game than he did last year. The problem was Ohio State had 4 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and 3 QB hurries. Most of those being committed, the sacks and QB hurries, by Michael Hall Jr., Tommy Eichenberg, Jerron Cage, Zach Harrison, Josh Proctor, and you also got to look out for JT Tuimoloau, who is constantly on the TV, constantly in view, and everything. This Michigan State team is broken. There's no offensive line. There's no run game. Any competent defense will sniff out this rushing attack. Period. Amen. The passing game is the only hope. The problem is against a team like Ohio State, who has a massive talent advantage. And who knows, this Michigan State team's bad enough to where Michigan and Penn State might be able to replicate these same performances on the Spartans. Though, as a Michigan fan myself, I don't even want to say that will happen, because knowing the history of the rivalry, that won't happen. And Tucker will probably have his guys ready. But that's a discussion for a different video. This team's busted offensively, defensively. Michigan State had 1 sack from Derek Harmon. They had 3 QB hurries. They had a defensive score from Charles Brantley. The defense did make some plays. Statistically, Michigan State last season, they didn't have a pick 6. They had a pick against Kyle McCord. They had 2 sacks. They had 1 QB hurry. They had 6 tackles for loss. A lot of those occurring in the second half. Now, some of these did definitely occur in the second half, but the pick 6 was in the first half. There were some other plays that Michigan State made on defense in the first half. Not a whole lot, but some that did certainly impress me. This was not Michigan State's worst performance. That was against Minnesota. The difference is Ohio State is miles better than Minnesota is. Ohio State would blow out Minnesota probably, or beat them by a few scores and pull away late at minimum, for sure. So this game was an off-brand remake of last year. If there was like season 1 of a successful TV show, this was season 2. It was basically same cast of characters, except Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are gone, and Kenneth Walker for Michigan State's gone, and he even didn't play too much last year against Ohio State, because unfortunately for him, he was injured. And to mention him and talk about him for a few seconds to maybe a minute, this game, this season, is just proof of why he should have been in New York. And probably why he should have won the award all friggin' together. Aiden Hutchinson's with the Lions right now. He is not doing too well. He just isn't in the NFL for whatever reason. I haven't watched much of the NFL, but I've heard that he isn't doing too well. Bryce Young is out for Alabama, and they are still beating Texas A&M by 7, and they're probably going to beat them by more. They have 198 total yards to Texas A&M's 96, and they have one turnover that probably prevented them from going up by 14. The Heisman should be awarded to the best player nationally. And I don't know if Kenneth Walker was the best player nationally, but he certainly was the guy who did the most for his team out of any of the finalists last year. Kenny Pickett would have for sure been second, but I'm confident Kenneth Walker was first because Michigan State's 2-4. Their losses are to a 4-2 Maryland team, a 4-2 Washington team who gave Arizona State, who's without a head coach, their first win. They lost to Minnesota, who I think Minnesota had a bye week this week, and they've lost to Ohio State. So they've lost to opponents who've all had winning records, but Ohio State is the only opponent they've lost to besides maybe Minnesota, who would even deserve of a top 25 or number 25 ranking. Though Maryland's 2 close losses to Michigan and Purdue, Maryland's still a good team. Michigan State's schedule's hard. They were handed a pretty tough schedule. And yeah, to circle back to Kenneth Walker, this season is evidence that he probably should have won the award because this team is a mess. CJ Stroud, speaking of Heisman, he's the ultimate Heisman QB. If a QB is going to win the Heisman, it has to be him. Has to be him because Jackson Smith-Njigba's injured. Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are gone, which means the argument of him being carried by 3 first-round wide receivers is out the window. He's just that good. He is that good. Honestly. 21-26, 361 passing yards, nearly 14 yards per pass, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick. He is that good. No one will come close statistically to him unless he gets injured. He will have over 1,700 passing yards, 24 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a QB rating that will probably be first in the nation because Jalen Daniels, or the quarterback at Kansas, first name might have gotten wrong. He was number 1, and after today, I don't think he's going to be number 1 because they lost to TCU and he got injured. Unfortunately, Jason Bean had to step in his place against TCU, and they actually played very competitive. Kansas is a really good football team, I think, but CJ Stroud's the ultimate Heisman QB. You cannot compete with his statistics, and the Heisman is unfortunately more about raw statistics than anything else right now, but CJ Stroud certainly will. I mean, with the injuries suffered at wide receiver, and given that, the award and what its narrative is and the qualifications for it, I mean, he's better than Bryce Young, he's better than Stetson Bennett, he's better than J.J. McCarthy, he's better than Caleb Williams. He's the best QB nationally, and there's no question about that. The Buckeyes averaged 8.3 yards per play. They rushed for 5.2 yards per carry. Moving on, because that statistic describes this game in a nutshell. This Ohio State team is vicious and does not look over anyone. No one's safe from them. No one. They either use you as a springboard to jump in the rankings, to further just push you down and pound you into submission. Or if you're a serious opponent, they again use you as a springboard to boost their resume, and they just wear you down. They wear you down and eventually break you. And no, Ohio State has not. This was their first road game. This was not a good opponent they faced. Notre Dame is not a good team either. I mean, they might be a good team, but they're not top 10. And they're beating BYU right now 18-6. So they might be top 25 if they get a win today. But again, Ohio State, they still got to play Penn State on the road. That'll be interesting. And they have to host Michigan at home, which will be the final exam, in my opinion, for them. The Spartan defense made some plays, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. And most importantly, spend the last minute or two talking about this. Mel Tucker needs to get better recruits to East Lansing and better assistants. His recruiting class is top 25, which is, great. And recruiting for Michigan State and for a lot it's slowed down some. For a lot of schools, Michigan's still outside the top 25, 28th best recruiting class for the 2023 cycle. Michigan State's 23rd by Joby, their best commit, edge rusher out of Oklahoma, 73rd best prospect in the nation. They have, they have a lot of guys. They have a lot of guys. They have 14 hard commits. They have 10 4-stars, 4 3-stars, an average commit ranking of 90.35, which is higher than Michigan, and it's close to Penn State's 91.12. So Michigan State's moving up in the world of recruiting. But you also have to get better assistants. You absolutely have to get better assistants. These assistants, like Harlan Barnett, went from leading the no-fly zone to leading international airspace. Like, anyone can fly here. Like, what are you doing? You probably should have been gone last year. Like, you cannot keep him after this season with how bad this secondary is. You can't do that. After this game, maybe that's not the right move, but he hasn't been recruiting well. His secondary isn't playing well. Maybe after this game, you give him the boot. I don't know. Scotty Hazelton, I don't even know what to say about him. He led a good front seven last season. Front seven this season isn't nearly as good, but there have been some injuries. And to Hazelton's not credit, but to cut him some slack, your defense can't be good if your secondary is just that awful. It's never going to be top 15 or top 25 with that secondary. And Hazelton's not in charge of the secondary. Barnett is, and Tucker is, and that's still the weakest unit in this entire field. But to give Hazelton some criticism, his schemes are not that good. They aren't. Like, not giving pressure against Washington is just one of the many examples of that. So Mel Tucker, after the season, he needs to get more talent and better assistance in East Lansing. And that right there is where I am going to end this video. A big, not necessarily win, but just an impressive win by Ohio State statistically. They moved to 6-0, get bowl eligibility. Michigan State falls to 2-4. Bowl eligibility continues to crawl away from them. And it's just a continuous spiral downward. Michigan State, luckily, hosts Wisconsin at home next week. Wisconsin beat Northwestern, but Wisconsin has weaknesses of their own, and if Michigan State can get a win there, maybe they can turn their season somewhat around and go bowling. So there is still some hope for the Spartans. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, comment your thoughts on this video and on this matchup down below, and click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post new content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.